we're just waiting for this generation's Napoleon Dynamite. Like, like that's what it's going to be. It's going to be a thing, that people my age in their mid 30s to 40s to 50s are going to look at and be like, I don't get it. But the kids are going to be going to school in the snow boots and the pants and the vote for Pedro shirts. And
Yeah.
It's just going to take that, and God willing, it's not Skibbity Toilet, but you know what?
Yeah.
But whatever gets people going back to the theaters, because I think what people will find is it doesn't matter what gets you to the theater. There's something magical about going to the theater.
Welcome to episode number 19. I am Benjamin Vomastic, and today we are joined by Terrell Boaz. Terrell is a post-production supervisor at one of the studios in Los Angeles, and Terrell has personally been super helpful to me through the years. He was one of the first filmmakers that I came in contact with before my first feature film, Rosetta Stone, and has been super helpful all along the way of both Rosetta Stone and now Hometown Summer that's in post-production. Answering any questions I've had, guiding me along the process, and deeply appreciative of it, and super excited to jump into a full, long podcast form with Terrell today. How are we doing, Terrell?
I'm doing great. How are you doing?
Good. Yeah, it's a little snowy today. I know you don't get that kind of weather in Los Angeles, but you're from Ohio, though, right?
Yes. Yeah. I'm
So
originally
you're
from Van
definitely...
Wert, Ohio. Yeah.
Oh, yeah, great. Just kicking things off. What got you started in the film industry?
So I've always kind of known from a very early age that I wanted to work in film. I was lucky enough growing up that my mother would supplement her income by painting faces at our local drive-in. So every weekend of my childhood was spent at our local drive-in movie theater. So from between the ages of essentially 7 and when I graduated high school, I saw every movie that came out. Like all summer, I was spent at the drive-in, and then my town had a twin cinema, the Van Wert Twin Cinema, that I would go every Tuesday and Thursday. So every Tuesday, I would watch whatever was in Cinema One, and every Thursday, I would watch whatever was in Cinema Two. And it just very quickly became a huge part of my life. And I was blessed enough that Louise, the woman who at the time worked at the movie theater, grew up. She was the mother of one of my father's best friends. So I actually got into the movie theaters for the children's price. So all the way up through high school graduation, I never paid more than $1.75 to watch a movie. So movies were always, the theater was always kind of like my safe space. But the things that there were two moments that really like sunk it in that this is what I was going to do. The first was I was 7 years old. It was a 10th anniversary screening of The Goonies that the drive-in put on. And that was the first day where I remember watching a film and I looked over at my mom and I was like, people do this for their job? And she was like, yeah, people make movies for their job. And that's kind of what planted the seed that could turn into something. And then I believe it was 1999. It was the trailer for the first Matrix movie. I saw the trailer for the first Matrix, and it was a transformative experience for me. Like I knew in that moment, like this is what I'm going to do. I'm going to Hollywood. I'm going to work in the movies, and I'll never forget it. I'll never forget it.
Yeah, and it held true. You did go to Hollywood and work in the movies. That's really cool that you were able to realize your dream. And just wondering if you could take us through that journey from college to where you are now.
Yeah. So I had trying to think of the best way to say this. My college experience was not normal. I was working the entire time I was in school, 2 to 3 jobs. I was a bouncer at some of the local bars. I worked at the campus recycling center, and I was also a closer at the local Sonic. Because of this, I was working 60 to 70 hour weeks.
Yeah.
So I was the kid who would register for as many classes as possible and then only show up on the test days and just see what I could pass.
Yeah.
And I just did this till I cobbled together a degree. I was in and out of school for 7 years.
Oh wow.
Um, and I actually left Athens, Ohio. I went to Ohio University. I actually left Athens, Ohio, and moved back up near my hometown and moved in with my grandma and just saved money for the move. You know, like I always knew that Hollywood was the place. I had so much student debt that my only choices were succeed and thrive or die in poverty. So I really like buckled down. My then girlfriend and now wife prepped for the move. A
Huh.
week before we move, I hit a deer, totaled our car,
Oh.
and put us straight into survival mode.
Oh
We
shit.
Yeah, we quit the jobs we were working. We got a job at PSI Manufacturing. They were a local car manufacturing plant. And we worked second shift, 14-hour days, 6 days a week for the next 6 months, and just saved as much money as humanly possible. And I'll never forget it because it was beginning of February. We were driving home, and I remember looking at my wife and just saying, you know, this life isn't so bad. Like, we're making good money. We can buy all of the things that I thought meant success
Yeah.
growing up. You know, like we made enough, we could get the four wheelers and we could go hunting and get the lake house. And like, we could do the things that growing up to me represented being successful. And it was in that moment where I realized, like, oh, this life isn't so bad, that I knew if we didn't leave immediately, we were we were at risk of getting trapped there.
Yeah.
We were getting too complacent.
Yeah.
And the next day, we went and we put our 2 weeks notice in,
Mhm.
and we loaded up the car. We shoveled the snow out of my grandma's driveway in middle of February. We drove to Los Angeles. Had no plan, nowhere to live. We didn't know anybody. We just knew if we stayed in Ohio any longer, we were at risk of never getting. So we packed up the car. We made the drive in 2 days. Me, my wife, and the cat. We stayed in a hotel the first couple nights because we didn't have anywhere to stay. While we just looked up and called every property manager we could find online. 3 days in, we're driving around Koreatown, checking on every apartment we can, and we finally settle on one that we can get into. It was 250 square feet. It was roughly the size of a large walk-in closet,
I've lived in one of
and
those.
yep, and it was me and her there for the first 3 months, and around month four, 4.5, one of my roommates from college called me. He was having a really rough time, and he was working as a copywriter out of Cleveland, and it's essentially called me and was like, "Hey man, like, can I come stay with you?" And I'm like, what are you talking about? Like, are you coming to visit?" And he's like, "No." He's like, "If I can't get out of Cleveland, like, I think I'm legitimately going to kill myself."
Oh
And I
shit.
was like, "Whoa, like, bro, like, yes, like, come stay with us. Like, it'll be fine. You know, we'll help you get your feet under you. You know, like, it'll be good." And 2 weeks to the day later, he shows up at our door, and it was me, my wife, and my best friend Jeff sitting on, or sleeping on the floor. Like, we were on a mattress. He was on a little pull-out futon in a 250 square
Oh
foot
my
apartment for the next
god.
9 months.
There's no
Yeah,
space.
and there was literally no space.
When you
Like,
said
we
you
we would
had
sleep
two
there.
people living there, I was like, that's
Yeah.
there's no
Yep.
space. Yeah.
It was essentially a bedroom for all of us. There was a sheet hung down the middle of the room, and like Jeff would wake up, he would leave. Like, we would sleep till we woke up. As soon as we woke up, we would go to our various jobs.
Yeah.
Like, because when we moved out here, like, we didn't know anybody. Like, when I say we didn't know anybody, I mean literally nobody. Like, I
Yeah.
couldn't tell you a single person that I had in. So when I moved out here, it was just me trying to figure it out. Like, I was trying to find jobs off of Craigslist, trying to find jobs off of Facebook, trying to do anything that I could. And because of this, like, I've worked every possible shitty job you can imagine. Like, I was a telemarketer, I was security, I did high pressure sales on the street
Oh
where
my
me and
god.
my wife would meet up at this marketing firm in the morning, fill our trunk with bags of makeup, and you had to approach at least 300 people a day and pitch them on this makeup product, or you did not keep your job. If you did it, and when you would go out training, there would be somebody with a clicker, and every time you walked up and pitched somebody, they would just click, click, click. And if you didn't hit 300 people by the end of the day, every day for your first 2 weeks, they cut you. And
That
it
sounds
was
miserable.
pure. Yeah, oh, it was the most miserable job you could possibly imagine. It was 6 days a week, 14-hour days, which was a common theme in really shitty jobs I've worked. Um, but it allowed us to stay.
Hmm.
Like we were working, I wasn't able to do anything creative, but it allowed us to stay in Los Angeles, to start meeting a few people, to get the lay of the land, to get comfortable being out here. And my wife ended up being really good at it. So it got to a point where she was making enough money that she could support us. She could pay the rent for our little apartment,
Yeah.
like she could pay for the groceries. And then I was able to take my first internship, which sadly, not many internships pay. This one was one of those very unpaid internships. But the beauty I've found of those types of internships is they don't pay you in money, but they'll pay you in experience and they'll pay you in access. So I was lucky enough that I was sorry, I just got a trying to connect message. Am
It
I
cut
still
out for
coming
a
through for
second,
you?
but I got what you were saying. Yeah,
Okay.
it didn't pay in money, but it paid in access.
Yeah. So I was lucky enough that this company I was interning at was what I like to refer to as a developmental management company.
Hmm.
So it was a management company that was founded by a guy who used to be a packager at ICM. So he was an agent for a really long time, had a messy
Hmm.
divorce, and just going through this divorce did a lot of like introspective self-evaluation and realized that he didn't want to be an agent anymore. He wanted to be more involved in his clients. He wanted to be more selective of who he worked with and how
Hmm.
he worked with them. And he took one of his favorite clients who was a recurring character on a couple soap operas and was on Justified for a little while and pitched him on the idea of launching this management company.
Hmm.
So they launched this management company out of a house in the Hollywood Hills. It was those two guys who wanted to be agents that Tom, the guy who founded the company, was kind of grooming, and then an army of interns. And when I say an army of interns, I mean I showed up day one and I opened the door and there are 12 interns just sitting at a conference table in a living room on their laptops, and all they're doing is submitting people for work. So as I get into the groove at this company, they start showing me things like their entire model is we are going to rep all of the B, C, D level people,
Hmm.
like the recurring guest stars, the people who got their first recurring guest star role, potential like or future stand-up comedians, but they also repped writers, directors. And the big problem they found though was none of the people could get work. Like you'll run into this catch 22 out here where nobody wants to hire you until you've already done the job, right? They don't care how talented you are. If you can't show me you've done it, I'm not going to trust you to do it.
Hmm.
And I went to them one day because I had no real desire to be an agent or a manager. I
Hmm.
just wanted to learn. I wanted to expand my network. And
Yeah.
I went to them one day and I told them, because when I was in school, I studied cinematography. And I told them, I'm like, you have writers, directors, and actors, none of which can work because they haven't worked on anything. You guys are a sound guy and like $1,500 away from being able to just shoot things.
Hmm.
Like I can bring my camera package in. Your writers can write scenes. Your directors can direct scenes. Your
Hmm.
actors will act in
Yeah.
them. And then we'll bring on two editorial interns. They'll cut the actors' reels together. And the plan we came up with was we essentially I pitched them on doing 3 reels for every person on the roster, an
Hmm.
A, B, and a C. And all the interns had to know was we could submit up to 3 people for each role. And if you're submitting person one with reel A, person 2 gets sent with reel B, person 3 gets sent with reel C. And we could just mix those up
Mhm.
to send people in for every role, but presenting them with a wide array of things to choose from in the
Yeah.
acting reel, and a lot of experience that they could draw on, even though they were scenes that were specifically written for the actor reel
Yeah.
rather than full projects that the actors had worked on.
Mhm.
And that actually worked. Like, our people were able to showcase their talent and were able to start booking work. And as work and money started coming into this company, we launched a couple web series, we packaged a couple movies that we tried to take to market to finance. And,
Yeah.
and it was a really awesome place to learn and a really valuable experience. Um, but my first job there, when they found out I didn't want to be an agent and I didn't want to be a manager, my first job there was I was given a textbook of film contracts and a razor blade. And I had to cut these contracts out of this book, scan them, send them through an OCR program, an optical character recognition
Mhm.
program, to convert the image to an editable text file because the company had so little money coming in that they could not afford an entertainment lawyer to draft their contracts. And yeah, I just did 8 hours a day, 4 days a week for months. I did this. And I'm probably 3 months in, and I went on Facebook and I reached out to every person I knew, every thumbnail I thought I could recognize from
Yeah.
a class. Like, I just searched for Ohio University, Los Angeles, and I reached out to every person on there and was just like, hey, I'm not sure if you have any projects coming up. I just had a crash course in film contracts. If you need any help with any paperwork, let me know.
Mhm.
I would love to help you.
Yeah.
And two young filmmakers from OU, one of which I kind of actually remembered. We lived in the same dorm building one
Mhm.
year. A guy named Ben and his best friend Dan, and they reached out and they're like, "Hey, we saw your Facebook post. We're trying to raise like $12,000 to shoot the opening 10 minutes of this feature film because we want to take it to market and try and get finishing funds."
Is this Ben
And
Rude, by the way? Sorry to interrupt.
this has been rude. This has been rude.
Awesome. Yeah,
Yeah,
he'll be on the
yeah, yeah.
podcast at some point.
Oh, amazing.
Yeah.
He's such a good guy, and he's like so incredibly talented. And he's actually making movies in Ohio. Like, he's one of those people who showed like you don't really have to be in a major production hub. Like, is it easier? 100%. But if you want to make movies, like Ben Root is the perfect
Mhm.
example of somebody who just like refused to give up on his dream and is now being honestly incredibly successful at it. I want to say he's on his like third or fourth movie
Mhm.
at this point. Um, but so I'm working at this internship. I reach out. Ben Rude and Dan Ray is the other gentleman reached out to me, and I came on and we raised the money on Kickstarter, and we shot the opening 12 minutes of a film called Maximum Coppage, or Max Cop for short.
Mhm.
Um, it was a 1980 style action comedy in the vein of Beverly Hills Cop.
Mhm.
And we went to market. We went to AFM and members only jackets and aviator sunglasses. And we went door to door to 500 rooms pitching this movie. And while we met a lot of distribution companies that were interested in the film when it was finished, financiers are a lot harder to find at a film market where people are going to sell finished movies,
I can
which was
imagine.
a very hard lesson that we learned. Um, but on making this project, I was lucky enough on one of our pickup days. I met a man, Joel Gregoire, who's now actually a post supervisor at Netflix, but he was nice enough to come out and do sound for us on a day of pickup shots.
Mhm.
We had one day of pickups, and our sound guy couldn't make it, but it was a really like, I don't want to say low priority because everything you film for your movie is a high priority,
Mhm.
but it was a newscaster that was playing on a 1980s tube television that was 12 inches in a bar, so it was a lot. It was a very low stress situation,
Mhm. Yeah.
and our sound guy couldn't make it. So we were reaching out to everybody we knew, and Dan Ray actually he had a friend, Joel, who said he would come out and do sound for us.
Mhm.
Joel's like, I'm not really a sound guy. He's like, I have a lav, I have a boom, I've done it. but like I'm not really a sound guy. But I think I could do this for you guys. I'm just trying to meet more people.
I hope everyone is enjoying this podcast. I just wanted to jump in real quick and say if you love comedy movies and miss the R-rated comedy movies of the 2000s, I currently have a comedy movie in post-production that I wrote, directed, and produced titled Hometown Summer. The movie is very much in vein of the 2000s-style R-rated comedies and follows the story of three childhood best friends whose plan to attend the same college is thrown for a whirl in a summer filled with drugs, sex, and bad business decisions. The movie is set for release in 2025, and you can follow the movie's progress on Instagram by following @Wolverines Productions, by signing up for our email list at hometownsummer.com, or by subscribing to this YouTube channel. All of these relevant links will be posted in the description along with the pinned comment. I hope you enjoy the rest of this podcast episode.
And I was like, "Oh my God, thank you so much, bro. We really appreciate it." And he comes out, and we're there. You know, it's a full day. It's like an 8 or 9 hour day.
Mhm.
And we're a couple hours in, and I'm looking around, and I realize like nobody's talking to this guy. Like Joel is the only person there working for free, and nobody's talking to him. And granted, you know, like we had all just like went to war together, you know, like we had all just made this movie and all this stuff, and nobody really knew him. But I was like, guys, I'm like, he's the one person working for free, and he's a sound guy. Like a sound guy working for free is a unicorn. You know, like the people say they exist, but you've never seen one. You know.
Yeah.
But so I went up to him and I told him, I'm like, Joel, like I really appreciate you coming out to help us. If there's ever anything you need help with, just let me know, and I got you, man. And he's like, well, actually, you know, as it always happens out here, he's like, actually, I'm trying to shoot a short. He's like, I have my actors, my props, my locations. I just need a producer to come on, help me raise like $600 to cover their gas and hotels to get them out to the desert, and I'm ready to go. And I was like, you know what? I was like, I have a buddy who lives like 30 minutes from Joshua Tree. I think he'll let us use his house. Let me call him. So I called my buddy Johnny. I explained the situation. He's like, yeah, bro, come out this weekend. And that weekend, me, Joel, our two actors, drove to Joshua Tree in a 1980s Mercedes turbo diesel with a trunk full of fake money and blank guns. And we drove out. It was like Thursday night, all day Friday. We were hiking our gear. We hiked like 3 miles into this box canyon, and we would just stash our gear in the rocks. So that way, Saturday morning, we could hike out really early in the morning and just start filming as soon as we got out there.
Yeah.
So we hike all our stuff out Friday. We go back out. We shoot all day Saturday, all day Sunday, and we're hiking back in Sunday night. I guess Sunday evening. It's like a race against the sun at this point, because we know if we don't make it back while the sun is still up, we have to camp out at night so we don't get lost. So we're running to beat the sun, carrying the C stands, you know, carrying the camera case, trying to get everything out. And we get to the top of this ridge line, and it's the first time all weekend that we have had cell phone service, and our phones explode with notifications. As we're there, Joel's phone rings, and you hear him answer, and he's like, what? When? Yeah, no, I want it. I'll be there. And he hangs up. And he looks at me and he's like, do you need a job? And I'm like, what do you mean, do I need a job? He was like, I'm the gear PA on Naked and Afraid. That was a producer for a Netflix show that wants me to PA their show starting tomorrow. I have a shipment going out Wednesday for Naked. I'm not showing up tomorrow. I'm going to send them your resume in the morning and tell them you'll be in at noon for an interview. And as long as you can impress them in the room, I think they're going to be essentially forced to give you the job. And I was like, I love this, but at the same time, I don't camp. Like, I don't know any of this outdoor gear these survivalists are going to be using to survive their time in the Sahara or, you know, wherever they're going. And he's like, don't worry. He's like, we have a 4-hour drive back to LA. I'll teach you. So one of our actors drove us back. Me and Joel sat in the back seat of his car, and the entire way he's swiping through his phone. He's like, this is this piece of gear. This is what we use it for. This is this piece of gear. This is what we use it for. And the next morning, I woke up, showered, got ready. I went into the Naked and Afraid office. Renegade 83 is the company, amazing company. I went into their offices at noon. I walked in, and naturally, they were not super happy to see me. They were in a very tough position, but they interviewed. I hit it off with them, and they gave me the job. I told them, I'm like, look, guys, like, I get it. It's a very less than ideal situation, but you just, I know you have a shipment that has to go out. I know the gear. Just give me this chance. Let me prove myself. If everything goes smoothly, hopefully you'll keep me. If not, I'll at least have been able to help you guys, like, not miss your shipment. Like, we know we can't afford production delays. Like, let me help you. But in the spirit of full disclosure, my wife at the time was very pregnant. And I told him, my wife is very pregnant. And when I say very pregnant, I mean could give birth any day. It'll be our first child. My mother-in-law is going to come out and help us once the baby's born. But once my son is born, I'll need to take like a week off just to like help my wife transition until my mother-in-law is able to come help.
Yeah.
And they're like, well, we don't really have a choice, so sure, like, we'll see how it goes.
Yeah.
So I went home. I showed up Tuesday morning. I packed the gear shipment. I went up like halfway through the day to the line producer on the show, Joe, and I was like, hey, Joe, like, I'm done. You want to come check it out? And he kind of gave me one of those looks like, what do you mean you're done? Like, clearly you missed something because you shouldn't be able to finish it this fast. And we go down there, and he checks my shipment, and everything's good to go. And he kind of gives me a look and thumbs up. He's like, thanks. And I come in the next couple days, I do the basic PA stuff. I stock the kitchen. I do the coffee runs. I make the copies. And Friday morning, baby stuff. My first week, that first Friday, day 4, baby stuff starts happening. So I call him. I take Friday off. The next morning, my first son, Owen, was born. I take that following week off. I come back that following Monday. So it's my 5th day at the office.
Yeah.
I'm late because I'm on diaper duty that morning, and there was a blowout. So I show up late. I go to the office manager, Eric, and I'm like, Eric, man, I'm really sorry. I explained the situation. He's like, no, we get it. It's really not a big deal. But all the PAs have been sent to set. We don't really have anything for you to do for the next few days. Just like maintain the kitchen, make sure things stay clean. If something pops up, we'll get you. And I'm like, I get it. I'm super sorry. I'm here to help any way I can. It's probably 15 minutes later, he comes up to me and he was like, hey, I need you to help casting for the next few days. And I'm like, sure. Like, I've never worked in casting. I don't know much about casting, but I follow instructions well. Like, sure. And he walks me to the other side of the building. He walks me up to this woman, and he's like, lol, Terrell, lol. He's going to be helping you. And then he just walks away. And I stick my hand out. I'm like, hi, I'm Terrell. It's great to meet you. She's like, lol. Lol Gordon was her name. Love this woman. I'm like, I've never worked in casting before, but I follow instructions well. So anything you need, just tell me. Show me once. You'll never have to show me again. And as the day went on, she would be like, hey, build me a pitch sheet for somebody. This is what they look like. And she would give me an example, and I would go into Pages. I didn't even have Photoshop at the time. I would go into Pages, and I would build these pitch documents, these like little one-pagers for the people that we would be presenting to be in the shows.
Yeah.
And as the day would go on, I would pick up on things like, okay, like, these are the people she's having me build the one sheets for. On the tracker, these are the people who on our rating system have a 4 or a 5. So I can reasonably assume that I'm going to need to build these for every 4 and 5. So in my free time, I would just start building people a little early. But then that turned into her turning to me later in the day, being like, hey, can you build a sheet for this person? And me being able to be like, oh, I already built it. Here you go. And the fact that I already had these built allowed me to observe her more. I was able to see the things that she was working on, and I was able to see and notice that over the course of the day, like, she was growing more and more frustrated, and she was getting a little angry. I don't want to say she was like screaming, but like she was frustrated. Like you could tell that as the day went on, she was having a much less enjoyable experience.
Mhm.
And I was kind of trying to identify, like, what's the pain point here? Like, what can I do to help her
Yeah.
without her having to ask me for help? And I realized that it was the emails. Like, every time she would try and do something, you would just see the Gmail notifications coming up. Because, like, we were casting big shows, like, for a fairly sizable reality company. Like, we were
Yeah.
working on, sometimes 5 or 6 shows at a time. We were getting hundreds of people a day just
Yeah.
trying to pitch themselves to be on these reality shows. So every time she would get into the flow state and be working on something, she would just get inundated by these emails.
Mhm.
So an idea was born. So I show up that following day, that Tuesday. I show up an hour and a half early. My desk faces the elevator. I sit there, I log into the casting email, and I go through and I build a tracker. I go through all of the emails and I build a tracker with all of the relevant casting info, like name, age, sex, race, location, and how well I thought they would do on a psych eval.
Mhm.
And I did this until I saw her walk off the elevator. As soon as the elevator door opened, I saw Lowell. I hit send, sent the email to the casting email. She comes, she sits down, sighs, opens her laptop, logs into the email, sees my email and like 2 or 3 others that had come in. And she just slow turns and looks at me. And I'll never forget it. She just slow turns and looks at me and goes, "What the fuck did you do?" And I panicked.
Oh,
Like, I panicked. Like, I immediately go to damage control mode. "I'm so sorry. I promise I will never do anything again. I was just trying to shift some initiative.
yeah.
Like, please don't fire me. Like, I have a wife and a 2-week-old at home. I'm sole income in our household. Like, please don't fire me." She looks at me. She's like, "What are your hours?" I'm like, "I work 9 to 9, but sometimes they let us go at like 7." And she's like, "No." And she gets up and walks off. A couple seconds later, you hear screaming coming from the other side of the office. And you just hear, "I like him. I'm keeping him. Fuck you, Joe." Door slams. She comes back like 5 minutes later and she's like, "You work 10 to 6 now." And I'm like, I really appreciate that. But I don't know if you missed the part where I'm like sole income, stay at home wife with a 2 week old, but I like really count on the overtime that I get from like my PA hours. She's like, "No, no, no, you don't understand." She's like, "You work 10 to 6 now. You're getting promoted. You're my casting coordinator." And I was like, "But this is only my second day in casting. Like, this isn't how things happen."
Yeah.
And we, for the next probably like the next 9 months, we do about 13 shows. I not shows. We do about 13 pilots. A couple of them get like picked up and like taken to series and stuff like that. But Lowell actually ends up getting pregnant, and we're planning for her maternity leave. And we start having discussions with the VP of talent at the company and one of the VPs of production, and just trying to come up with like a succession plan for while Lowell's out. And the
Yeah.
plan that we had come up with was essentially while she was out on maternity leave, I would step up and I would become the interim supervising casting producer.
Yeah.
And then when she came back, I would step down, she would have her job back, I would be a casting producer, and everybody would be happy. And it's the day before she leaves, and she looks at me and she is like, "You need to go to the head of production while I'm still here to back you up and ask for a raise." And I'm like, "Yes, I do." And I sat down and I spent the next couple hours writing out my speech as to why I deserved a raise and how much I thought I was worth. And I memorized it. I tucked my note card in the back of my pocket and I walked into his office and I was like, "Hey, Grant, can I talk to you?" He's like, "Yeah, yeah." And I shut his door and I immediately launched into my spiel. Like, "This is how much I'm worth. This is the work that I'm doing. These are the comps. Like, I would love to continue working here, but for me to do that, I feel like my pay should reflect my work." And he looks me dead in the eyes and he's like, "Well, this is awkward." And I tell you, I was ready for a yes. I was ready for a no. Nobody in that situation is ever ready for somebody to look you in the eye and say, "Well, this is awkward." And I'm like, "What's awkward?" And he was like, "I was under the impression that after tomorrow, you no longer worked here." And I was like, I'm sorry, what? He was like, yeah, he's like, we're shuttering the casting department. And I'm like, no, you're not. And he's like, I think I would know. Like, yes, we are. Like, we've sold 8 shows. We're rolling into production on all of these things. Like, we aren't going to be casting anything. Like, Lowell's taking maternity leave. We're going to shutter casting. And then when she's back, we might be ready to ramp some shows up. He's like, has nobody told you guys this? I was like, not only has nobody told us this, we've actively been working with people on a succession plan for how the department was going to run while she was out.
Yeah.
He was like, clearly somebody has been left out of the loop. Let me have some conversations. I will come and I will talk to you all before end of day tomorrow. We'll figure this out. And it was about 4 o'clock the next day. At 4 o'clock that afternoon, Grant comes over and he tells us, he was like, I'm not sure how this happened, but we're shuttering the casting department. We have enough left in the overhead. We can afford to give you guys 2 more weeks of pay. You can come in and look for jobs. You can just take the paychecks and stay home. But at the end of the 2 weeks, like, we don't have any overhead left in casting, and we're shuttering the casting department. So I went from thinking I was about to have a career defining promotion and experience to being given a 2 weeks notice while I have a stay at home wife and a almost 1 year old at
Yeah.
home.
Oh my God.
And it was absolute panic mode. It was in that moment I realized how woefully unprepared I was for the job hunt. And because of that, like, I came in every day. I was the only person from the casting department who came in every day for those next 2 weeks because my desk was the one that faced the elevators. As soon as the elevator doors opened, I was the first person you saw.
Yeah.
And I made sure every person that came up that elevator saw me sitting there moping, applying for jobs, knowing that I have a 1 year old and a stay at home
Yeah.
wife at home, knowing that I was the sole income. And that second week, one of our post supervisors at the company, Melissa Butts, bless this woman. Um, Melissa Butts comes up to me and she's like, "Hey, I heard what happened. I think it's really messed up what they did to you guys. I know you've never worked in post production
Mhm.
before, but I have enough budget left on my show. I can bring you on as my post PA." She's like, it's a downgrade, but it's a paycheck. In those 4 weeks, I will teach you how to deliver a show. If
Mhm.
you like it, if you're good at it, I'll roll you on to my next show as my vault coordinator, which is just a fancy way of saying I would handle delivery and the incoming and outgoing assets on the
Yeah.
show. Um, and she's like, if you like it, if it works out, she's like, you give me 2 years, I'll make you a post supervisor. And I was
Hell
like,
yeah.
it was another one of those moments where I'm sitting there and I'm like, this isn't how this happened.
Yeah.
And I went in. I did good work. She's an amazing woman. She's an amazing teacher and an amazing mentor and taught me so much in those 4 weeks. And I found that I was good at it. Like, I never really worked in post production. I didn't get my first computer until I was 21.
Mhm.
Like, I'd never done any of that stuff, but I'm very good at organizing. I'm very good at compartmentalizing
Mhm.
things. And at least in terms of like post management, post coordination, like, those are amazing skills to have. So I'm working on some shows with her. I'm vault coordinating. I'm eventually vault coordinating on Naked and Afraid. And I'll never forget, I was walking by the head of post of that company, Marco. I was walking by Marco's office one day and he was in a screaming match with one of the showrunners. And the gist of their conversation was the showrunner was saying, if you don't give us another assistant editor or a post coordinator, we will not be able to finish the show. And Marco's like, if I give you another headcount, you won't finish the show at all because we won't have any money to finish the show. And it was like a movie. I like rewound myself. I like walked backwards and I popped my head and I was like, I'll do it. And they're both of them immediately just like, what? And I was like, I'll do it. Like, I'll come on. I will coordinate this show. And they're both like, no. I'm like, no, like you don't understand. Like, I'll come on. I'll do it in addition to my job. You don't have to pay me. Like, just pay me like the paycheck I'm getting for the vault
Yeah.
coordinating I'm doing. But make sure I get credit and make sure that, like, it's recognized that I am the post coordinator. Like, I don't just want screen credit. I want people to know that I'm doing this.
Yeah.
And they're both like, no, no, no. But it wasn't because they didn't think I could do it. Like, the show was a very troubled show. Um, we won't reveal the title of this one, but it was a very troubled show. Like right from the beginning, there were two showrunners that just did not get along.
Yeah.
Um, and they were essentially trying to protect me. They're like, we like you, and you will never work on a show that has as many problems as this show ever again. And a very important lesson I learned is if anybody ever tells you to avoid a show because you will never work on a show as difficult as that show again, you run as far and fast away, or you run as far as fast as possible.
Yeah.
But at the time I was just looking for experience. I was like, I'll do it. And when I say it was a troubled show, at one point, like there was a rift between the showrunners, or one of the showrunners stood up, said, "My people with me," and half the staff, you just heard laptops shut, unplug, and they walked out of the office. And from that day forward, they worked at a satellite office. So I'm having to bounce between the two buildings, shuttling
Yeah.
drives back and forth because the showrunners don't trust each other to digitally send things. So I'm having to sit there while they watch down the episodes and give notes and driving back and forth. And it just became too much. Like at one point, the network came in and they literally fired every person on the show except for me, the lead AE, and the clearance supervisor because we were the only people who knew where things were. The clearance supervisor was getting a little angry at the time and wasn't very happy and was threatening to walk off the show. And the AE hit the end of his contract and like he went to another show. So there was a time where I was literally the only person on this show. I would show up to the building, I would boot up 12 avids, and I would just do whatever I could. Like thankfully it was a non-union show, but like I would just do whatever I could. Like I would have one avid importing, one avid exporting. I would be on another one like retagging metadata and
Yeah.
organizing photos and building clearance grids, and this went on for like 6 weeks. I was the only person on the show. And one day my phone rings and hello? And, hi, this is Janet with Apple One. I'm like, hi, Janet. I don't know what Apple One is. Can you tell me a little bit about yourself? And she goes on to explain that Apple One is a temp agency and she had a job for a studio, a major studio out here.
Mhm.
And she's like, I got this job. I got your resume. They want to bring you in for an interview. And I was like, oh, cool. Like, what's the job? Like, tell me about it. And she was like, I don't know. And I'm like, what do you mean you don't know? Like you're the recruiter. And they're like, look, like normally we get a job post detailing everything. This is just a job title and the subject line of an email, and the body says, bring this guy in for an interview with your resume attached. Do you want to come in or not? And I was like, sure. Like I'm the only person on the floor. I have nothing to lose. I've never been on a big studio
Yeah.
lot at this point. So sure, why not? What time do you want me there? She's like, we need you here for 1:45. So I show up the next day and I go in and I I'll never forget. I'm sitting in the lobby of the suite and this assistant helped me back to this man's office. I walk in, he introduces himself, his name was Ben. I'm like, hi Ben, I'm Terrell. It's great to meet you. And he leans back in his chair and he's like, so I got your resume from Mark, right? Mark Graziano? And in my head, I'm like, I don't know who Mark Graziano is, but he got my resume to this person who brought me in for an interview at a major film studio. So I'm like, yes, yes, you did. And he's like, oh, how do you know Graz? And I was like, oh, it's just one of those weird, like Hollywood web things, like a friend of a friend of a friend type things. And he's like, oh, yeah, yeah. As soon as he found out that's where my resume came from, he puts his hands behind his head, leans back, crosses his legs, and just bullshits with me for the next 45 minutes. Like we talk about everything other than the job.
Yeah.
Like, like he's talking about, he's like, yeah, I'm a single dad, so like sometimes I come in a little late, sometimes I leave a little early, like some days I may not come in, depending on what's going on with my kids. And I'm like, dude, I got a 1-year-old at home. If my wife could hear you right now, she would flip. And we're almost an hour in, and he's starting to show those body language signs, that the interview's coming to an end. And he goes to stand up, and I told him, I was like, hey man, like this was fun and all, but what's the job? And he reaches over and he flips his monitor around and he's like, does this spreadsheet intimidate you? And I was like, no. And he's like, you'll be fine. And I was like, cool. And I shake his hand and he's like, we have to make a decision soon. We'll be in touch. And I was like, awesome. So I leave, I go back to my job, after one of the most surreal experiences of my life. And I just get back to work, and over the next 2 weeks, like the network comes back and they're wanting to ramp the show back up. They're interviewing new showrunners. We're trying to bring on new editorial staff. It's things are starting to get cobbled back together. Then my
Yeah.
phone rings. It's Janet at Apple One. I'm like, hey Janet, what's going on? She's like, they want to bring you in for a second round interview to meet the team. Are you available tomorrow afternoon? And I'm like, sure, Janet. Like, why not? And I hang up. And as soon as I hang up, I realize that I'm about to go meet the team for a job I know nothing about, other than it has something to do with spreadsheets. Now, it's important to know at this point that I had never really used a spreadsheet. Like, I had done rows and columns, but like I didn't know about VLOOKUP or index matching or
Right.
pivot
Yeah.
tables or
Mhm.
any of the million things that Excel's actually used for other than basic math.
Yeah.
And I realized I'm about to go into one of the largest studios in the world and interview with the team for a job about spreadsheets when I don't know how to build a spreadsheet. So I went home that night and I spent 4 hours on YouTube
Mhm.
just watching tutorials, like
Yeah.
most commonly used formulas and functions, like how to VLOOKUP across sheets. And as I'm watching these things, I'm like, oh man, this is incredibly useful stuff to know. Like this is really going to help me as I move forward in post production.
Mhm.
And but my goal was, I'm like, I don't need to get the job. Like I learned enough in those 4 hours to know that I'm not qualified for this job, right? But you never want to come across as unqualified in a room. So my goal was, I'm like, I need to be able to speak about this intelligently enough that when I go, yeah, they told me we have to have somebody start essentially the Monday after the 4th of July, so we have to let somebody know soon. I
Yeah.
was like, no worries, I leave, right? So like we're in like full bore hiring mode on the show that I'm on at this point. We have a new
Mhm.
showrunner, we're interviewing editors, we're bringing on a couple new story producers, and it gets to the 13th of July, and my phone rings. Janet at Apple One, and I answer. I'm like, Janet, I'm loving these phone calls, but I genuinely have no idea why you're calling me. They're like, we want you to come in and do start paperwork. I'm like, Janet, the only job I interviewed for a month ago. The person they hired started almost 3 weeks ago. I have no idea what you're calling me for. Like, what job is this for? And she's
Yeah.
like, look, I don't know. She's like, reach out to whoever you interviewed with it at the studio and like see what's going on. Give them a
Mhm.
call
Yeah.
and then call me back. And I call Ben and I'm like, hey man, like I just got this weird phone call from Janet at Apple One. And he's like, oh my God, I'm so sorry. And I'm like, what? He's like, well, that's a really shitty way to find out you got the job. And, I'm ecstatic. I'm like, oh my God, I got the job.
Yeah.
And in that moment, though, I realize I'm like, look, like I tell him, I'm like, look, full disclosure, like the company I'm currently working for, we've had some issues with this show I'm on. And I walk him through what happened. The showrunner's getting fired and leaving and
Yeah.
everybody. I would do 12 to 13-hour days on this reality TV show.
Mhm.
And then I would go home and I would do Excel tutorials until I passed out. Like every morning, I would wake up with a dead laptop on my legs or on the floor
Yeah.
beside me from just doing Excel tutorials or calling every person I knew who was like a CPA or a junior accountant, anybody who had ever taken an accounting or economics
Yeah.
class. I took every course on Lynda and Coursera and Udemy, everything you could possibly imagine.
Yeah.
And when I walked onto that studio lot my first day on the job, when I tell you I was an Excel wizard, like there was not a single thing in that program that I could not do.
Yeah. Hell yeah.
But when I tell you that not only did I not have to open Excel for the first 6 months I was at that studio, but the job they hired me for was utilizing a tool called Smartsheet, which at the time was a very new program, which was kind of like Excel and like a project planner had a baby, right? But at the time, it was a very, like, they weren't even a publicly traded company yet. It was a very new company. So no matter who they hired, they were going to have to do a ground up training. They told me, they're like, we just wanted somebody who was likable and not afraid of spreadsheets. So I show up to the studio. I'm on the integration and planning team.
Yeah.
And my job is streamlining and automating workflows. I'm working with the different business groups in the studio, and we're essentially trying to migrate them out of an Excel and email centered workflow into a more automated Smartsheet workflow. And over the next 2.5 years, I work with my team. We automate roughly 85 workflows across 15 different business groups. And in that time at the studio, I ended up automating away roughly 30% of my own job. I happened to be sitting in the post-production suite of that studio, the feature post suite.
Yeah.
And I had formed a relationship with the head of post. I'm a hobbyist magician on the side. I'm a magician at the Magic Castle, and I was performing a magic trick at my desk one day, and the head of post walked by and was like, "Did you just do a magic trick?" And I was like, "Yeah." He's like, "Show me something." And every day after that, he would come by my desk, "Show me something. You working on anything new? Show me something." And then that turned into him bringing people he would have meetings with by my desk. They'd finish their meeting, and he'd be like, "Oh, come here, Charles, show them that thing you showed me." Right? So it just like started proliferating that I was this magician, and I started meeting people all over the studio because of it. But because of this and through this, I formed a really solid relationship with the head of post at the studio. And I went to him one day. I was in there for a couple years. I had 15 hours a week where I'm literally doing nothing. And I went to the head of post and I told him, I'm like, "Hey, I've automated away a large portion of my job. I have a history in reality TV post. I would love to learn more about what you guys do in the feature post world. I'm not sure if this is something you'd be open to, but I would love to just like sit with you for, an hour a week or so and just kind of pick your brain, just like ask you questions, And he loved it, like he was nearing retirement. So like he was very open to the idea of just sitting with a young person who was eager to learn. So we started doing that for the next few months, and I was learning a lot from him. And I asked him, I was like, "Hey, I'm not sure if this is something you'd be open to, but I'm really interested in seeing how the studio builds their post-production schedules. Like, are you open to me taking some post-production schedules home and just kind of breaking down how you build them here at the studio?" And he was like, "You want to do more work without getting more money?" And I was like, "Yeah." And he was like, "Nobody's ever asked me that before. Of course you can." So every night for the next month and a half, I would go home with a stack of post-production schedules, and me and my wife would sit there and we would break down the post schedule. And I would love to see how the studio utilizes the budgets and how they build the budgets for post-production in the various aspects of the film. Are you open to me going through some of our past films budgets and just kind of breaking them down and kind of analyzing like why certain things cost what they do? And it was one of those same situations where he's like, "You're asking for more work for the same amount of money?" And I was like, "Yeah." And he's like, "Nobody's ever asked me this before, of course." And it was that same thing for the next 3 months. I went home and every night I would just break down budgets. And I would just see like, why is it cheaper here? Like why is this 20 days and this 25 days, And it was another one of those things where like the more knowledge I had, the more I was able to just ask these intelligent questions. And what I've found is one of the most valuable skills you can have is the ability to ask intelligent questions. It's much easier to go to somebody and ask, "How did you do something?" versus "How do you do something?" Like the best example is like, you never want to go to a film producer and say, "How do you finance a movie?" Because there are a million ways to finance a movie. And it's just you're either going to get a generic answer or they're not going to want to answer the question because you could just Google it. But if you go to them and you say, "How did you finance this specific movie you made?" then it allows them to draw on a lot of very specific personal experience. And you'll get much deeper like answers and you'll build a deeper connection with these people. And so I had built the schedules, I had built the budgets, I had learned all of the stuff. I thought I was ready. I had the skills, and I went to the head of post and I told him, I was like, "I think I'm ready to supervise a movie." And he's like, "I think you're right." He's like, "We actually think that you and the other two post coordinators in the department are all ready to supervise movies, but we weren't going to give you one unless you came and asked. And I went and I took the other two guys on a walk because I knew we were launching a streaming platform soon, and I knew we had a bunch of lower budget movies coming. And I took these
Yeah.
other guys on a walk and I told them, I'm like, guys, these movies are coming. All you have to do is go to Greg, the head of post. All you have to do is go to Greg and say, Greg, I want a movie, and you will have a movie. It was one of the most eerie experiences of my life. They both verbatim said the exact same thing. It'd be cool if they offered me something, but I don't want to rock the boat.
Mm.
And I'm a boat rocker, you know. So I went to Greg and I told him, like, look, it's not my place to speak for these other two guys.
Yeah.
If they don't ask for a movie, I'll do all of them. They didn't ask for a movie, I did all of them. And for the past, 3 years now, I've been supervising at this studio. You can look at my IMDb and see some of the movies that I've worked on. But I've been fortunate enough to work with, giant stars and giant directors
Yeah.
and have an amazing time. Um, all from being likable and not afraid of spreadsheets.
Yeah, yeah, that's a great. That's a truly great story, and yeah, no, I look forward to jumping into part two. That was really fun though. Things look a little different. We did move this podcast into a two-parter. We had a good first part, and as you can also see, I'm also have a different mic. This is actually the mic we used on Hometown Summer, and yeah, I mean we've got a few really big questions to go through. We had to make sure the audio was optimized, and yeah, we are back now, and yeah, just jumping right back into things. The first question I have is, why do you think the studio system has started pumping out less and less comedies, and especially post-COVID? I mean, we've just seen so few produced. And it's a bit of a two-parter, so I can ask this again if this is all too much at once. But do you have any optimism that we could see an influx similar to the way we did in the 2000s?
Yeah. So I think the first, let's tackle why I feel there are less comedies being made.
Yeah.
First, it's obviously it's very expensive to make and distribute a movie now more than ever. I tried taking my family to the movie theater just last week. It was me, my wife, our three kids, and it was $120 just for the tickets to the movie. It's very expensive to go to the movies. It's very expensive to make a movie, but also a big thing I think that people don't really think about is like there's a minimum threshold to marketing a movie. Like you'll hear people throw out numbers, like a marketing budget on a film is anywhere from like 1 to 1.5, even 2 times the production budget of a movie.
Right.
And that's true. And obviously that scales, the more expensive your movies are, the more expensive the marketing budget. But what people don't often talk about is even though you're spending that much in marketing, even if you're not, like, there's still a certain threshold. Like, it still costs a certain amount of money to make a trailer, to get your trailer in theaters in front of a movie, to get your marketing material in front of the eyeballs that will get the butts in the seats to go out and like see the movie. So like a lot of the like mid-tier movies, like the anywhere from like 15 to realistically like $40 million movies, a lot less of those movies in general are being made and sent to theaters, and comedy just happens to be a victim of them.
Right.
Like comedy just generally falls in that budget range, whether it's rom-com, raunch-com, high school comedy, like it always seems to fall in that budget range.
Right.
And another thing is, like movies nowadays, they have to appeal to a global audience because of this cost associated with movies, because of the cost of marketing a movie. You need movies to appeal to a more global audience to help recoup that budget, and comedy for the most part just doesn't translate well. Like things, even in our country, even in America, like things that, middle America finds funny aren't necessarily things that the coast will find funny. You
Hmm.
know, and the things young people find funny aren't necessarily things that old people will find funny. And that disparity in the like sense of humor and what people are finding amusing
Yeah.
only widens as you spread culturally throughout the world.
Hmm.
You know, like a lot of like the inside jokes and the jargon and like the memes and the virality of movies doesn't necessarily translate well. And before, you know, you could have movies, you know, Porky's, American Pie, Anchorman, like all of
Hmm.
those greats of like, you know, the 80s, 90s, even
Yeah.
early 2000s. But one of the reasons those movies were so successful is because they had the juniors and the seniors in high school, you know, the 16, 17-year-olds who are finally able to go to R-rated movies, going and watching those movies because that's what everybody was seeing. That's what the kids at school were joking about. That's what the kids on the sports teams were joking about. Those are the things they were quoting and dressing as. Like it was it was going viral before the internet was really mainstream for young people. You know, like
Hmm.
that's where we got the memes, that's where we got the jokes, you know. Nowadays young people aren't going to the movies. You know, like the Gen Zers and whatever the young generations are called nowadays, you know, like they're just not going to the movies in the numbers that we did. You know, like they say the millennials are the last movie going audience. And that reflects in the content, you know, like we need more of those young high school crowds like really getting together and going to the movie theaters again, I think, before we'll really see like mainstream comedy come back. You know, and obviously like there are going to be outliers, you know, like
Hmm.
studios are still trying to make a few of these movies every now and then. Um, but for something to really like come through and be the next American Pie, you know,
Hmm.
where you get not just one, but like five movies that go theatrical and then all of the straight to DVD sequels and jokes, like, you know, like people still make, you know, that one time at band camp jokes, and that
Hmm.
movie's almost 30 years old, you know, like, but for a movie like that to become a cultural phenomenon again, it really needs that younger audience. And to circle back to the second part of your question, like that I think is kind of what gives me hope. You know, this lack of comedy shows that the people who are in control and making the decisions, they don't understand what resonates with the young people and what will
Hmm.
keep the young people there. And anybody who's studied Hollywood in any capacity can see that Hollywood is very cyclical. We are in the same type of atmosphere that we were in the late 60s, early 70s, where the studios are out of touch with what gets young
Yeah.
people to the theaters, you know, and it's going to take that next generation of young, hungry, independent filmmakers kind of kicking down the door and giving people what they want for the studios to take notice and then bring them into the fold. I
Hmm.
think that there's going to be a massive shift in the types of movies and how movies are made over the next few years, not just because of all the technological changes, but also just the cultural shifts in the way people are consuming their media.
Yeah.
But I mean, like you look at the things that young people are watching today for like the comedic relief in their life,
Hmm.
and like you can tell that they're just waiting for somebody to give them something. Like
Yeah.
that, you know, like Skibbity Toilet has over 50 million views on YouTube. Like as much as I could not care, I could not care less about Skibbity Toilet.
I don't
But
even know what that is.
right, like I have three children, so I hear these things from their friends and all
Yeah.
this. Like the fact that there are over 50 million people watching something like that tells me like they want comedy that will make them laugh. They want things that will entertain them and give them memes and the jokes and the things they can talk about at school. We just need somebody in a position to give them that.
Yeah. And that's funny because I've seen a lot of stuff on the internet. I mean, you read a bunch of shit, and most people have no idea what they're talking about across any industry. I mean, like I see that like in poker, if you go and like look at what people are writing on the internet, it's just like no one knows what they're talking about. So like it's not like the the officials or the educated or whatever, like they're not usually the loudest voices, but a common thing I see people saying is they're like, oh, people don't want to watch a comedy movie anymore. They want to watch something funny on TikTok. And I don't really understand that. If you find something really funny, why would you say, would you really say like, oh, that's too much? I want to laugh for 5 seconds. You're going to try to make me laugh for an hour and a half. Like I can't do that. Like that seems just like such bullshit. And I feel like comedy and horror, but I mean, horror's thriving. Comedy's like one of the biggest ones, if not the biggest, in my opinion, that benefits from a communal experience at the theater.
Yes. 100%. Yeah. And like comedy and horror have like the same like structure to them, right? Like it's all tension and release. It's just whether it's a jump scare and a sting or, you know, some sort of like physical or like vocal comedy, you know, like it's just whether it's a jump scare or a laugh, right? But like the editing of the same, you know, like great horror editors make great comedy editors because it's all about tension and release, right?
Yeah.
But it's funny, my wife and I were actually just talking about something very similar to this the other day. And what I think it comes down to, what we think it comes down to is instant gratification. Like people nowadays would much rather watch something on TikTok that's 30 seconds or a minute long that's going to make them laugh. They're going to get their dopamine hit, and then they can just swipe to the next one. They don't want the tension build between scenes. They don't want that connective tissue because that's where the anxiety rests. You know, that's where the tension builds. They don't want to be tense. Like there's so much uncertainty and things making the young crowd nowadays like anxious and depressed and worried and all of those things, that the idea of sitting in an uncomfortable situation waiting for that moment of release is just so unbearable to them that they would rather just watch fart videos on Instagram or watch, you know, kids fall off bikes or people trip, you know, like they would rather watch anything that has no emotional stakes, but they still get that dopamine hit of a laugh at the end. Than really like sit in the material.
Yeah, I mean, that is an interesting point. I wonder how prevalent or how much that applies to, because I mean, like, there is this idea that, like, I think the internet and social media crowd overhypes things, like, or like, I'm trying to think of how to phrase this. Like, I feel like there's a disconnect between what real life is and what social media is that I've definitely fallen victim to. Whereas, like, everyone feels this way, and I'm like, I'm an alien because like I don't agree with any of these people. But then you meet people in real life and they're like, oh, I'm not even on social media, and it's like a lot of them don't feel the way these people feel. So, I mean, I wonder how much what you just described, like how big of a percentage of the demographic that actually applies to. Because like when I go to the theater, when I go to a horror movie, for example, I feel like the majority of the people sitting in the theater are around my age or younger.
It definitely depends on the type of movie. You know, like horror will always get like it'll always draw in a younger crowd because it's always exciting. It's something new. But also horror's primary audience is, you know, the teenage date crowd. It is the young date crowd. Like that's what gets a lot of people out to the movie theaters and stuff like that. But with the social media aspect of it, I think that a thing to remember is when you're going and watching these horror movies, I think that people may look younger than they are, because you have to remember, assuming you're watching the modern horror, they're mostly rated R movies, so
right,
18 and up, you know. So like don't get me wrong, still very much children, still very much teenagers, but they're at like the upper end of the spectrum. And even then, I would venture to say that they're probably people who are in their low 20s, at least from like the research that we've been seeing.
Okay.
Like there are definitely, don't get me wrong, there are definitely still people going to the movies. but there are movie theaters closing every day.
Hmm.
Like ticket sales are going down, ticket prices are going up, people are getting priced out of going to the movies. Like people are like they would rather just sit at home and doom scroll TikTok a lot of the times than spend the $25 for a movie ticket it'll cost you in a major city to go to a movie theater.
It's
Um,
so interesting because they're like $11 here.
oh, yeah, it's like we went to a matinee
Yeah.
of Sonic 3,
Uh-huh.
my family of five, and it was $120 after the discount for the movie tickets. Like
Yeah, I
it's
mean that's tough.
it's a lot, and the movies are like one of my favorite places in the world. Like I grew up going to the movies and going to the drive-in. It's my safe space, but like people are very quickly getting priced out, and that's where a lot of those like middling movies, like you can't guarantee that your $15 million movie is going to be successful anymore.
Right.
Like back in the day, you could pre-sell international territories, you could pre-sell physical DVD sales and VHS sales to the big box stores. Like you could make money before your movie even started rolling in production.
Hmm.
Like those days are gone. So like you can't build your budget that like people are just taking bigger risks to make movies,
Yeah.
and you can't rely on the small niche crowds coming out and like blowing your movie up and spreading it via word of mouth so you don't have to spend money on the marketing because so few people are going to the movies now. Like they're only going out for the big superhero movies or like the big blockbuster movies, and so many of those are such a letdown
Yeah.
that people are just they're losing faith. Like,
Yeah, I mean that is I do want to get back to the point you were making about pre-sales and DVD. That was actually the next question. But I mean this does open up an interesting loop for sure. Because it's interesting. You were saying initially, if I understood correctly, that you have the optimism that a different crowd is going to be producing movies that will get younger people excited. Is that correct?
yes, yes.
But
So
and oh sorry.
no, go ahead.
But then I was going to say, so it's not a secret what you just said about things have been a bit gloomy with the box office. So then I'm just curious overall, do you have optimism for the future of the box office or mixed or yeah, like where do you stand with this?
I have immense optimism for the future of the box office. Like I don't think the film industry or making movies is going anywhere. Like there's a lot of like doom and gloom in the media right now about like Hollywood's fleeing and running and nobody's making movies. And that's just not true. Like movies are still being produced. Like we're still making the same amount of movies we always made.
Mm-hmm.
It's just that things are happening in different places. Like like not everything's being made in Los Angeles, Atlanta,
Right.
New York anymore. Like places are building facilities in Albuquerque,
Mm-hmm.
and like Canada, the UK, like Belfast. Like there are so many places now that movies can be made and can be made fairly inexpensively compared to
Right.
major production hubs that the lowering of costs, while terrible for the local Los Angeles film industry or New York film industry, like
Right.
the lowering of cost by outsourcing or moving to these other countries is going to allow filmmakers more creative freedom because it's going to reduce the production budgets, which is then going to allow you to have to recoup less at the box office so you can take more creative choices, like a movie like The Substance,
Mm-hmm.
like I don't know if you've seen The
I
Substance,
did. Yep, I
but
saw it in theaters.
yeah, like that's like that type of movie where you're able to take big risks and make something fairly inexpensively, and then it become the cultural phenomenon that film has become.
One, yeah, no, that's such a great point. That one, yeah. I mean, I feel like we've had a few of those. I definitely Long Legs.
Yes, yes, like so,
I mean,
like
Long Legs was a bit more. It was less strange, but like same idea.
yeah, and,
Yeah.
and I think that one gives me immense hope for the optimism of the film industry. Is just
Yes.
as budgets come down, creativity will go up. And,
Yes.
and also just like all the technological advances that are happening in film. Like I work with a lot of students. I work with a few schools that do semester in LA programs where I'll
Yeah.
go in and I'll talk to the students. And some of these kids, like some of the, I say kids, they're, 21, 22 years old, but like
Right.
some
Yeah.
of these kids in their early 20s are now coming out of school with 10 or 15 years After Effects experience. And
Right. Yeah.
I've been working in Unreal Engine since I was 12. And like some of the things these people are putting out for cents on the dollar is mind blowing.
Yeah.
Like I was just talking to a kid yesterday. His name is Colin Black. I don't know if I should say his name or not, but his name is Colin Black. He's one of the most bonkers talented filmmakers I've ever seen. He went to Ohio University where I went to school. I've just met him through a random group of people, but him and his friends made a commercial that they entered into the Doritos Crash the Super Bowl commercial.
Right.
They're currently in the top 25 right now. It's voting still going on. They're still in contention. It cost them $100 in an afternoon in their backyard. And it's a full Trojan horse sequence where they like digitally built a Trojan horse and they costumed everybody. And like, it's amazing to watch. Like you look at it and it's like, oh, that's a really cool commercial. But then you hear the story where it's like, oh, this was 4 people in a backyard and they literally spent $100. And it's like, my mind is blown. Like, what could this person do if I gave them $50,000?
Right.
Or $500,000? Like, there are people who are coming out now, who are like coming up in the industry now, that like one man band like doesn't do them justice. Like there are people who are just insanely talented. Like the team on Everything Everywhere All at Once. Like they used so many people who they just came up doing After Effects and doing Blender, and they were learning how to build the bagel like while watching Blender tutorials. Like
yeah,
the technological capabilities of the next generation of people coming up and the level of comfort they have utilizing that technology, I think is going to push film in directions that people never saw it going. Like the European film market this past year was one of the most exciting things. Like the films coming out of the European film market, like the small indies these people are making, and the budget level that they're putting on screen, you would have no idea how cheap they're making these things. Like you watch and it's like, oh, this is like a $50 million movie, and you find out it's $500,000, and it's just like,
right
sorry,
on,
how
yeah.
did you do this? Like who's your line producer?
Yeah.
I have immense hopefulness for the future of film, both theatrical though and just the general film industry, right?
Yeah.
Like theaters and like the theatrical movie going experience, it's obviously going through change and evolution. Like it's evolving, it's becoming more of an event like going to a play on Broadway was.
Right.
Like it's definitely becoming a bigger thing. But as that's happening, there are a lot, at least in cities like Los Angeles, New York, there are a lot of smaller theaters that are popping up, and they're servicing the art house cinema. They're servicing the international films, the small films that you don't really see in theaters most of the time.
Right.
There is a growing crowd of those people, but I think the thing that honestly gives me the most hope for the film industry is it has never in the history of the world been easier to make and distribute a movie. Like you're the perfect example. Like you can save money, make a cheap movie, and just put it out there.
Yeah.
Try and build word of mouth, try and build your tribe, your little audience of people who will come out and buy every movie you do.
Yeah.
You can find 10,000 solid fans, you can make movies for the rest of your life.
Oh, 100%. 'Cause you make a movie, you make a behind-the-scenes documentary to sell in addition to.
Yep.
You get ancillary products. I mean, just that 10,000, it's not just them, because then it feeds algorithms. And,
exactly. And
you eventually get to a point where you can go on tours and like take it to different theaters across. Kevin Smith does this. I fucking love it. It's so awesome because he's bringing the theater experience around the U.S. And I huge movie theater advocate, and like that's awesome that like yeah, I'm going to go on this tour and we're going to go to 100 different theaters and we're going to show this movie and then we're all going to hang out together for 2 hours afterwards and have an interactive experience between the cast and crew and the audience. Like, I'm going to, it's not going to be as big of a tour. I don't have that kind of budget or that big of an audience yet, but I'm 100% going to do that on a much smaller scale with my movie that's about to come out for sure.
Yeah. And that's what gives me optimism, right? Like, you know, people are all, like, you know, like, I think this may have originally been one of the questions, you know, like, what do people, like, what aren't new filmmakers doing, or what are they doing wrong?
Yeah.
And the thing I always tell people is, like, people just aren't making enough movies.
Yeah.
Like, they're just not making enough movies. Like, they don't realize how doable it is. Is it going to win an Oscar? No. Is it going to make you a millionaire? No. But are you going to learn? Yes. Are you going to improve? Yes. Is your next one going to be better? Yes. You do this 3 or 4 times, and suddenly people can't tell the difference between your $50,000 movie and $1 million movie or a $5 million movie. You know, like, it's there's something to be said about just getting the reps in.
Yeah.
And it's easier now than ever to do that. Like, you can shoot features on your phone that hit the tech specs for actual distribution deals.
Right.
You know, like, the only thing holding people back is the patience it takes to sit down and write a screenplay.
Oh, yeah. No, so 100% could not agree more. Obviously, that it's easier than ever to make a movie. With that being said, no matter what, it's going to be a lot of work, but it's doable. Everyone can do it. Like, yeah, everyone can save up money and make a movie. It's doable enough that anyone can reasonably afford to save and make a movie. With that being said, you are undergoing a massive project for sure. I could say that firsthand. I've gone through the process twice of being writer, director, and producer on a film. It's a lot easier the second time around, I will say that much, in terms of, because you already know what everything is.
Yes. So, yeah, to be clear, yes, it is extremely difficult to make a movie. But in comparison to making a film 50 years ago versus making a film now, it is categorical differences of each.
Yes.
Still incredibly difficult, incredibly time consuming. Like, you know, I didn't have gray hair 5 years ago.
Yeah.
You know? Like, it's it's a challenge, but it's the best kind of challenge.
Yes, I was about to say, I know we were just throwing out, like, all of these, like, for lack of a better term, like, I guess, like, challenges or, like, pessimistic outlook, but, like, to go back to Optimism, when it's done, talk about one of the most rewarding feelings you will ever feel.
Yes, that, the sigh of relief that comes when I'm, like, doing a DCP sign off, where we're signing off on, like, the final digital cinema package that's going to theaters, and the credits roll and the lights come up at the end and they're like, so is everybody good? And everybody gives the thumbs up. You hear just that collective sigh of relief of 15 people in the room, just knowing we're done. All that's left is the premiere. We're going to go have a few drinks, watch the movie, celebrate, and never think about it again.
Yeah. And I mean, I think this all ties in what we were just talking about, or what you specifically brought up, in that these comedy movies don't have to be the $15 to $50 million, the 15 to 50 million, or whatever the budget range you get, the mid-budget. They don't have to be it's like Blumhouse. I know they do horror, not comedy, but like Jason Blum, perfect example. What, like, everything's made for like $1 to $2.5 million and they're horror, but you could do the same exact thing with comedy.
Sorry. So that was how Blumhouse got their start. Blumhouse is very much making like 20 mil plus movies now.
Okay, they did just do Speak No Evil, didn't they?
Yeah, well, like you know, like if you look at the last like 10 Blumhouse movies, you know, like the Halloween movies, the Exorcist movie, the Megan, Five Nights at Freddy's, like they're doing
Okay.
very big movie.
Yes. Okay. So the Blumhouse framework of how they got started,
yeah,
very much, and they killed it. I mean,
yes.
what they did Insidious, didn't they?
Yeah, Atomic Monster. Them and James Wan did it together.
Yeah,
but yes,
and
like
Lee Winnell was quite involved with them as well, I believe. And yeah, these were all super cheap movies that did very well. And it's like like the only thing, unless you're making like Tropic Thunder, which had like a $95 million budget or something like that, like you can make American Pie for $1 million. And that, if you gave me $1 million to make a high school comedy, holy shit, I don't know what I would do with all that money.
100%, 100%. And like a lot of the cost for those high school movies, they come from just like using young people, like the cast. There's a lot of ADR. There's a lot of things that go into
right.
it. Well, 100%. Like Pitch Perfect, Bring It On. Like there's a whole like sub niche of those like high school competition or like college level competition comedy movies that perfectly fit in that vein. The real beauty of comedy is when you find one that works, you'll get a theatrical movie and then you'll get 6 or 7 straight to DVD sequels.
Mm-hmm.
There's 9 Bring It On movies.
Mm-hmm.
Like there's something to be said there. And I don't think comedy should be in that like crazy expensive budget range. Like obviously
right.
Thunder is an outlier because the cast involved, the above the line on that movie was so astronomical. But like, like comedies shouldn't be that high, because when you have like Robert Downey Jr. in a comedy not in blackface, like, seeing somebody of that level in a comedy is just distracting. Like at least for me, it breaks the suspension of disbelief. Like it takes me out of the movie when I see them. That's one of the reasons why American Pie resonated so much, because at the time none of those people were recognizable. I mean, Eugene Levy, but like
Eugene Levy, and I guess like Thomas Ian Nicholas and Tara Reid to a small extent, but
for the most part though, like it was very much like these are just people. Yeah, I saw it. Yeah. Like these are just people who look like they could be high schoolers. It's like the hot girl from high school, the cute baby from high school. Like they were their characters first. Like I never looked at Tara Reid in that movie and was like, oh my god, I love Tara Reid.
Right.
Like I recognized her. I knew who she was, but like it wasn't to the point where it took me out of the film.
100%. No, this is so funny that we're talking about this, because like I actually have a couple of videos. Like I have videos backlogged to make sure I can get at least one upload every week, and I have a video talking about like how crazy it was that like the American Pie cast was just loaded with a bunch of no names and a couple of small names, and then one like actually no, like Eugene Levy. But like they all went on and they like had killer careers after. Like every single person on that poster made millions of dollars afterwards. Like they had it really and it's like so crazy. Like spoiler alert, like Sean William Scott, he had never done comedy before, and it was his first feature film ever.
Yeah.
He said he had no idea what he was doing. He was shocked that he got the role. He couldn't believe it. He was working at Home Depot at the time, I think, and he got paid $8,000 to play Steve Stifler.
And Stifler's a legend. Like, like we still talk about Stifler. Like we still quote Stifler. Like Stifler's mom is still a thing. Like it's a cultural phenomenon.
Yeah.
Like,
no, it's so funny. On if you can't tell, I'm a big Michigan football fan. And I'm on this Michigan football message board, and my username on there, Steve Stifler. And every time I comment, like people always post like gifs of Stifler. Yeah,
it's so good. But like that's what you get when you have a cast like that, though.
Yeah,
like everybody's just there for the sake of the movie, creating something greater than the sum of its parts. There's nobody worried about their image or looking cool or anything like that. Like they're just there for the movie,
Yeah, no, 100%. Like, yeah, like we know Sean William Scott is Stifler, not Stifler is Sean William Scott, and it kind of goes back to the Robert Downey Jr. and Tropic Thunder and Blackface.
Yep.
I don't know what his character's name is. I genuinely don't.
I don't either. It's literally one of my favorite comedies. I
Yeah.
can't tell you his name.
Yeah.
I can't tell you any of their names in that movie.
Yeah.
Other than Pacino.
I don't know his name.
Brandon T. Jackson is the actor,
Okay.
but in the movie he's the booty sweat guy. But other than him, I can't tell you it's Jack Black, it's Robert Downey Jr.
Yeah.
Still, and
It's unrecognizable Tom Cruise.
yeah, peak Tom Cruise. Peak Tom Cruise. Love that movie.
Yeah. But yeah, so it sounds like you're optimistic that we will be able to get this sort of movie made for the reasons you mentioned about it being cheaper, being able to make it all across the U.S. And so you think that eventually, like what we saw with Longlegs and The Substance, like those were two huge, very recent ones that had a very big cultural phenomenon. You think that we're eventually going to get that with comedy and probably other genres inevitably as well, and this will spark a cinema going culture again?
I do. I think we're just waiting for this generation's Napoleon Dynamite. Like that's what it's going to be. It's going to be a thing, that people my age in their mid 30s to 40s to 50s are going to look at and be like, I don't get it. But the kids are going to be going to school in the snow boots and the pants and the vote for Pedro shirts. And
Yeah.
It's just going to take that, and God willing, it's not Skibbity Toilet, but you know what?
Yeah.
But whatever gets people going back to the theaters, because I think what people will find is it doesn't matter what gets you to the theater. There's something magical about going to the theater.
Oh my God, yeah. I go 50 to 100 times a year, and I still feel that magic every time.
Yeah, like the popcorn smell, the sounds. Like I used to work in a movie theater,
Yeah.
There's just something about it, especially with things like the AMC A-list,
Yeah.
they're trying to make it more accessible for people who really want to go, but it's getting those people, like the fair weather moviegoers, like the people who are only showing up for the Marvels and the Star Wars and things like that. It's showing them that, hey, you can have this experience on a smaller scale. And when it's on a smaller scale, you'll actually connect with the material and the other people in the audience more,
Yeah. Yeah, and I really hear what you're saying. I think that I really feel like Longlegs especially brought in some of those people for sure.
Yeah.
A story from Longlegs is I saw that the day before our first day of production on Hometown Summer. I went to a 10:30 screening on a Friday night. So we started shooting on Saturday. And I was like, okay, I'm excited, going to the movies. I do this all the time, but like, woohoo. And, I didn't think about it on a conscious level, but on a subconscious level, it's like, all right, I'm going to get there. There are like 200 seats in the auditorium. There'll probably be about 10 people here. I walked in, it was sold out. Because I bought my tickets earlier in the day, and I saw like 10 seats were already taken or whatever.
Yeah.
It was sold out. I could not believe it. And it's like a non-existing IP that was, I don't remember the budget. I want to say it was $9 million. It was high single digits.
It was a small movie, but yeah.
But it sold out, and the box office numbers reflected it too. I want to say it did over 100 million, and that was so special for me because I care so much about the theatrical experience and the future of movie theaters, and seeing that a non-existing IP, non-sequel, non-whatever was able to do this was like, okay, we might have something brewing.
Yeah. Yep.
Yeah.
There's a really UCLA every year puts out a report called the UCLA Hollywood Diversity Report.
Mm-hmm.
And they break down the numbers, who's going to the movies, like what, age demographic, what race, where in the country people are going to the movies. And you know, like one of the really interesting things that it points out when you look at the data is first time directors, the ROI, the return on investment of a first time director's theatrical studio film is within 0.5% of established studio directors. The difference is their movies are smaller. Their movies are making less money, but the budgets are smaller.
Right.
You know, but when you look at the data and you realize this, you know, there's an argument to be made for just making a lot more smaller movies, you know, because if you make a lot more, the ROI is going to end up being roughly the same, and you just need one to hit it out of the park.
Right. It seems like that's what they were doing a lot more like 20 years ago.
Yeah, exactly.
Yeah.
Like the idea of a film studio slate came about.
Yeah.
And we're just going to diversify our investment across these 20 movies. Hopefully one of them will make us, you know, then $500 million, now $1 billion.
Yeah.
And it'll cover our loan. But the problem we run into is we're so spoiled with the $1 billion movies, you know, with the Avatars and the Marvel movies. And
I don't even like those movies.
We're so spoiled with these crazy high inflated numbers.
Yeah.
That the idea of getting 100% return on a $15 million movie isn't exciting. It's like, cool, we profited $15 million.
Yeah.
And it's like, well, you know, like Marvel movie X just grossed $700 million. You know, we made $200 million off of it after all said and done. It's like, well, yeah, you did, but the work involved, the stress involved, the gamble, you know, like, you might have a Spider-Man Homecoming, but you might have a Madam Web, you know?
Yeah. 100%. And that would be just so much better for audiences.
Yeah.
Like, everyone will get something they like. I think there's a reason why aside from obvious factors, I think there's a big reason why, and it's underplayed, why the box office 20 years ago was doing a lot better than it is now.
Yeah. Well, so, but just to speak to that a little bit, though, so, like, one of the things that a lot of people don't realize is back in, you know, like, especially the 90s were, like, the golden age of pre-sales, right? Like, you could take a lot of risks on movies and you can make a lot of things because you knew, like, certain companies had their partners and their distributors and stuff, but, like, they knew as soon as my movie's done, Walmart's buying 100,000 copies of the DVD.
Yeah.
Their stores. It doesn't matter if the movie's good or not. I know as soon as it's finished, I have a deal with Walmart. They're buying 100,000 copies of my movie.
Yeah.
I'm making $10 off of each one of those copies. That's $1 million of my budget that's recouped before I even start filming. Let alone, like, the bigger movies where Walmart's taking more than 100,000 copies.
Right.
And Targets and the Office all of the DVD sale places.
Yeah.
Like, such a huge part of it was, and people bought them. You know, like, people would buy those movies, they would watch those movies, they'd be like, oh, the movie was pretty terrible, but then they'd buy the sequel when it came out because there just wasn't as much to watch. There wasn't as much choice. Like, if you wanted comfort and familiar characters, you know, you might watch Rocky 7, you know, instead of taking a shot on a new movie or something, you know? So it's changing and evolving, but I think that what people will find is there are going to be a lot more independent filmmakers building their audience and essentially being able to run, whether it's Kickstarters or Indiegogos or whatever, or even like a Patreon, they're going to be able to find that they're able to pre-sell their own audience and their own fan base, similar to how bigger companies would pre-sell international territory.
Right. Yeah. So is that, because, like, that was the one question I said we get back to. So do you have optimism in that space because of that? Do you think that that's going to help counteract this big problem?
Yes.
Yeah.
Yes. Because, like, you can make a movie about literally anything now, and through the internet, through Google marketing and Google ads and Facebook marketing, and find an audience for it.
Right. Yeah.
You can make a movie for the 10,000 people that exist in whatever hobby you're looking at.
100%. Yeah.
Market to those people.
Yeah. Everyone has an audience. Yeah.
Everyone has an audience.
That's, And that's just such a beautiful thing with AI and how that's helping everything, is that the AI algorithms, they're getting better and better at connecting you with your audience. I mean, on with movie platforms, but also with just social media platforms. I mean, like the platforms are fundamentally changing, where there are people saying that subscribers and followers don't matter anymore. That's just not true, because I have subscribers and followers who don't, their thing isn't necessarily what I'm doing, but I still see them interacting with my stuff. But it matters much less than it did like 10 years ago or whatever. And you get like these people who are not subscribed to you, don't follow you, that see your content on YouTube and Instagram and find you through that, because they're a part of the niche and the interest that you're sharing. And that's only going to help this. I mean, it's already helped me. I mean, I'm still on the early stages of my social media, but I mean, already I'm starting to see returns from people who just, someone in Connecticut that has no relation to me whatsoever, never heard of me or whatever. And because they watched the American Pie trailer or whatever, now all of a sudden they're being pushed to my YouTube channel.
Yeah.
And yeah, I mean, that makes me very hopeful that I'll be, because even 10 years ago, sure, it was still possible to find these people, but it would cost a lot more money and would do a lot more trial and error, a lot more A/B testing. And I still absolutely have a marketing budget, and I take that seriously. Like, I'm going to take that a lot more seriously this time around. Now, like, you live and you learn, but also like I'm going to get that boost from just the algorithms are so much better that I'm going to get more organic traffic than I could have in a prior era. And that just makes me so hopeful that I'll be able to, at the bare minimum, be able to. I don't know how long it will take. I don't know if it'll be 5 years, 10 years, whatever. But just keep working at it and be able to get into a space where I can totally do, at the minimum, what Kevin Smith is doing with like just going across the country and being able to show my movies. Like, that would be so awesome. I mean, obviously, in an ideal world, I would love to like just get like a what's the word? Full theatrical release, not limited.
Yeah.
That's the dream.
Theatrical.
Yeah.
Yeah.
Yeah, wide theatrical, yeah. But, I mean, at the bare minimum, I'm personally optimistic that I'll be able to at least do what Kevin Smith is doing.
Yeah. That's a great goal. Like, that's the approach that everybody needs to have. Like, so many people define success in, like, the film industry as working at a studio or making these $100 million movies, and they don't realize that that's like 0.1% of the people who work in film work on those movies. We always go back to the same stable of people. We fight to get new people into like the stables and like the rounds and the vendors and stuff like that. And like you realize how, like, when they say it's a small world, like how small of an industry it actually is when you're in the studio level. Yeah. And you realize, each studio is making anywhere from like 10 to 20 movies a year. Mm-hmm. That's 100 movies. Of the thousands of movies that come out, like people just they need to readjust the approach and like reevaluate like their path there. And I think they'll find that what they thought was a wall was a gate, and there's a door like right next to them. They just need to go around a little bit, and they'll make their way through.
100%. Yeah. I mean, it seems to me like the indie space is already starting to get bigger and bigger. Like, I know like it had like its so-called heyday, at least to date, like back in the 90s with Tarantino, Smith, Rodriguez, so on and so forth. But it seems like independent films, maybe not being produced as cheap as they started off, those guys, but it seems like I'm seeing a lot more indie films in the cinema, and it can't be anything but a good thing. I mean, personally, I can't imagine I would even want to work with a studio, to be honest. Like, obviously, in an ideal world, I would love to get like a $50 million budget, but I know there's a lot of shit that comes with that and a lot of control that you just have to forfeit. And that scares me. Like, the idea of like, I wrote the screenplay and it means a lot to me, and it's very personal. And then all of a sudden, like, by the time by the time everything that happens from there to when it has its release, and it's like, wait, what? This is like 20% of what I wrote. That scares me.
Yeah, and that can definitely happen. But there are definitely pros and cons of this studio space. Like,
Oh, I'm sure. Yeah.
having a supportive infrastructure to help like guide you through the process is definitely there. But
Yeah.
but when you've come up in the indie space, like it is the process is very different. Like there are a lot of cooks in the kitchen on studio movies, and until
Yeah.
you're at the point where you're really established and have the power and weight behind you to be like, no, this is how we're doing it.
Yeah.
There are a lot of people trying to drive you. So
Yeah.
yeah,
But yeah, for sure. No, I love this. I love how optimistic you are. That is something like not just from this podcast. Like we've talked so much about various other things. Like we could seriously go on for 24 hours talking about all the things you're optimistic about, and I love that. You just bring like such an optimistic, positive energy. I mean, there's just all of the news, like I don't even read them anymore, but like all the news outlets. And I mean, I know we've talked ad nauseum about how much I hate Reddit, but like everyone's just so negative, and they want to say like, oh, this is happening, this died, blah, 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 blah. And I mean, I love it. I mean, I love the positive attitude you have and the optimism you have. I mean, it fires me up. It excites me for the future.
yeah. I like people like the film industry. I feel like gets a bad rap, especially recently with like all of like there's a lot of fear mongering going on. You see things like survive till 25 and the film industry's dead and Hollywood is fleeing and all these like terrifying headlines, but like people don't realize, like, is it hard to find a job in media? Yes, obviously. But it's always been hard. When Toy Story came out, everybody was like, this is the end of movies. We don't need actors anymore. Technology is getting to the point where we're never going to need actors. And like so many, every time there's a technological advance, people panic. But what people don't realize though is there was a giant influx of jobs when the streamers were coming up, and even into COVID. If you talk to people who got their start since 2020, so many of them got their start as COVID PAs, COVID compliance, environmental health and safety. Like those jobs were created to help the influx and the need of getting the streamers up to speed, covering all the health and safety aspects of the COVID crisis. But now that we're through COVID, now that the streamers are established and they're realizing, oh, everybody has a streamer now, it's not sustainable to keep making things, those jobs are disappearing, they're downsizing. But you're seeing these terrifying headlines about layoffs and more layoffs and people fleeing and things shutting down. But what people don't realize is those jobs didn't exist 10 years ago to begin with.
Yeah.
So it's like, is it harder than it was 5 years ago to find a job? 100%. Is it harder than it was 10 years ago? So like, but like the thing is, it's always going to be hard. You just have to believe in yourself and recognize that making movies isn't about making money. If you're in filmmaking to make money, you're in the wrong business. Like the people who are really successful at making movies are people who would be making movies if they were flipping burgers or if they were working at Costco. Like they would still be making movies.
Right.
Those are the people who are successful. It's the people who are like, I'm going to do whatever it takes to pay my bills, to give me the mental health and time and space that I can afford to be creative and get this movie done. Like those are the people who are going to succeed.
Yeah. And they'll make the best movies because anything made out of passion is going to be so much better than anything made for profit.
Exactly.
Yeah.
Sorry, my wife.
Oh, yeah, no problem. But, yeah, I mean, that really covered well everything about Optimism for the future of comedy and the problem with the DVD sales and whatnot. And I mean, one last point I'll say on the Optimism for future of comedies is, well, I mean, I guess you already did say this now that I think about it, but what I was going to say is it just takes one. It just takes one. But yeah, I mean, so the two questions I ask all my guests, I mean, what gives you optimism for the future of the industry? I think we just discussed that for the past half hour. So I mean, we got a lot of good nuggets there. Really great stuff for sure. And then the last one, your top 5 comedy movies of all time.
It's funny because I went through and I made notes on all of the questions, and this was the one that was absolutely the hardest for me. But not because I was like, oh, I love so many. Like, I'm very particular about like the comedy that I watch.
Yeah.
Like, I don't like a lot of like punch down comedy. Like, I don't like comedy where I feel like I'm laughing at a person and not like a situation.
Oh
So like,
no.
I don't like Chris Farley movies where it's like, oh, you're laughing at him because he's a fat guy in a little coat, you know, or
Yeah.
like Will Ferrell movies where it's like the gullible idiot or like the lovable idiot like mentality. Like, I try not to. Those just don't really resonate with me. But that said, there are 5/6 comedies that I continually come back to. My favorite comedy, hands down, not even close, is Super Bad.
Oh my God, that's my number 2.
Yeah,
I love that movie. Hell yeah.
Bad holds a special place in my heart. I still quote that movie almost daily. Like, my friends and I, when that movie came out, like, people don't forget, like we would quote that movie ad nauseum all the time, like not even close. Super Bad.
That's so
Number
good. That's we're
yeah,
1 for 1 on my top 5.
number
That'd be my number 2.
is Tropic Thunder.
That's a very good movie.
Frickin' love that movie. It's the perfect like Voltron of a comedy movie. Like, it's so many just different things that on paper, like when you like if somebody were reading me bits of Tropic Thunder, I'd be like, this isn't going to work. And then it just comes down, like the cameos, like
Yeah.
the leads, like everything about that movie is just perfect. And just like the balls that it took to make a movie like that,
Oh yeah.
like beautiful. My third favorite comedy is Walk Hard, a Dewey
Okay.
Cox story.
Judd Apatow, yeah.
Yeah, freaking love that movie. I've listened to Pandora radio, like the internet radio, since beta. My favorite Pandora station I listen to every day is Walk Hard, because it's the perfect splice of every genre of music. The movie's incredibly quotable. John C. Reilly is like the goat of acting for me. Like, that man is so incredibly talented in comedy, drama. He's a songwriter,
Hmm.
like Broadway, like that. That man, I'm watching Winning Time with my wife right now. Peak John C. Reilly. That movie is just so good. The reason I said 5/6 is because the next two are kind of a duo for me. Forgetting Sarah Marshall and Get Him to the Greek.
Okay,
Uh,
interesting. So you like Russell Brand a lot.
well, it's funny because it wasn't. I don't really know what it was about those movies that really just did it for me. I love Jason Segel. Like
Okay, yeah.
Russell Brand, like Aldous Snow is probably my least favorite aspect of both those movies. He's amazing in both those movies, but
Yeah.
like there's just something about Jason Segel and Forgetting Sarah Marshall and just the comedy of that entire situation is isolated on one location, primarily being the resort, like so it's small even though it's a tropical island. Like, I love
Yeah.
Tunis. Like, I love just everything about that movie. And
Hmm.
Get Into the Greek is just like a natural follow-up to that. It's a little weird now with all of the, P. Diddy stuff coming out,
Yeah.
because it's essentially his character from Get Him to the Greek. So that was a little strange, but there was just something about that movie. But both of them were when I was in college, so it was just like that time in my life, core memories, me and my friends sitting around drinking and partying and just putting one of those movies on.
Yeah. Yeah,
And
right.
then the last one is American Pie, because
Oh, yes.
yeah, that was, and like other than Super Bad, Tropic Thunder, the other four are kind of like interchangeable. Like, there's no real top behind
Yeah.
Super Bad, Tropic
Uh-huh.
Thunder for me, but American Pie was just so just perfect. Like I was like 11, I'm pretty sure when that movie came out. Like
Okay.
it was the
And it was
movie,
99,
like,
yeah.
yeah, 9, yeah. So I would have been 11, yeah. Like it was just one of those movies that like you would hear the older kids like making the jokes and like
Yeah.
you would start doing like this one time at band camp and
Yeah.
you had no idea what the rest of the story was.
Yeah.
And then, like me and my friends all got together one night at somebody's house for a sleepover, and one of them stole American Pie on VHS from his parents' bedroom, and we all huddled around like the 20-inch tube TV
Yeah.
watching it. And it was perfect. Like it completely lived up. Everything was hilarious. We didn't understand all of the jokes, but
Yeah.
you better believe we went to school the following Monday and we're quoting everything we
Oh
possibly.
my God, yeah.
And it's just like I feel like I can't think of a comedy, and I'm sure there have some, but I can't think of a comedy that has had the cultural impact that American Pie has had.
Yeah.
Like the prominence of the word MILF. Did that word exist before American Pie? Maybe. I had never heard it.
Yeah.
Like there are so many things about that movie that like I still see memes posted every time there's a pie at a grocery store where the center hole is a little too big. Somebody will post a picture.
Yeah, yeah.
Like, there's just something about that movie in the cinematic world that it built. Like it wasn't just American Pie for me. It was all of them. American Pie 1, 2, Reunion, Wedding. Like
Yes, those were all great.
You grew and aged with those characters, and all of them just hit. Like even the straight to DVD ones, fucking Beta House, the Naked
Beta House, Book of
Mile,
Love,
like,
Naked Mile, Bandcamp.
yeah,
Yeah.
like there's just like so much about that movie. Like that movie just did so much. Like for cinema, for like it's so weird saying that movie did so much for cinema, but like
Yeah.
I really feel that there was a cultural shift in comedy and how it was presented and who it was targeted towards.
Yeah.
After American Pie. American Pie, like don't get me wrong, like we had Porky's, 1, 2,
Right.
like we had movies, the Animal House that
Yeah, that was about to bring
did
that
it
one up, yeah.
before American Pie, but I feel like American Pie is the one for at least that millennial generation. Like that's the movie that shaped comedy for us.
Yeah. No, that there is something just like really special and uniquely provocative about it. I mean, my parents were very strict. I wasn't allowed to watch movies like that until I was of age to watch it. And I remember even then, I probably watched for the first time when I was 18 or 19 on Netflix. And I remember even then, like thinking, like I was like feeling bad to watch it. Like I was like, oh my God, I'm gonna do it. Like I'm gonna see what this is all about.
Yep.
And it was special.
Yeah, well, that's the thing is like, very rarely does something get hyped and built up like American Pie was, and then it actually live up. Like that was the thing I think for me was, because like there were a lot of those things growing up, right? Like there wasn't the internet, there wasn't streaming, so like you would hear about like Orgasmo, was one of those other like movies of that time where like everybody was talking about this movie and how crazy it was, and then you watch it and it's like, oh, like that movie was kind of not great at all, so like you go into it with like these tempered expectations and like halfway through you're like, there's no fucking way that this is actually going to be this good the whole way through. And finishes and it's just like, oh my God, like this movie made me feel something. Oh, it's just so good. I legitimately think I might watch that movie tonight.
Oh, every time I watch it, I have to watch all four. Yep. And it feels special every time I watch it, like once a year, and I seriously feel something special in my heart every single time I watch it. It's just such an amazing, special movie. No, I really hope I get to speak with Jason Biggs or Adam Hers or Paul Weiss or any, like I would love to have them on the podcast at some point.
Yeah.
But yeah, no, we actually had two, American Pie and Superbad, and then my other three would be Wedding Crashers, Fast Times at Ridgemont High, and Euro Trip.
Oh God, Eurotrip. See, Eurotrip is like rotating on that list. Like I watch Eurotrip a lot. Like still, like Scotty Doesn't Know is like on my playlist. Like I can quote pretty much everything from that movie, and like that, and like Scary Movie 2 is another one that was like just like really like critical core cinema memory for me.
Yeah.
Like honestly, I would probably boot like Forgetting Sarah Marshall and Get Him to the Greek for Eurotrip.
Yeah.
I,
Yeah.
I would,
I'm with you there.
that movie is just such a part of my regular rotation that I don't even think of it as a comedy because it's just like a feel good movie for me. I'm just like,
Yeah.
today kind of sucked. Let's watch Eurotrip.
So
like,
good. Yeah.
Fast Times, freaking great, freaking.
Oh my
movie.
god,
Great
so
movie.
good.
Wedding
Yeah.
Crashers. I think I've only actually seen Wedding Crashers twice.
Okay, that's my favorite all around movie of all time.
Yeah, me and Vince Vaughn are, you know.
Okay, see, he's my favorite actor of all time.
Oh,
So,
okay. Yeah, like
yeah.
he I think what ruined it for me was the remake of Psycho that they did.
Yeah.
Like after that, I was just like, every time I see you, I just see you as Norman Bates, but like the worst Norman Bates, and he was fine. Like he's by no means a bad actor,
Uh-huh.
but like he's one of those people that every time I see him in a movie, I'm like, oh, it's Vince Vaughn. Like
Yeah.
I can't separate like how I was talking about how like I want comedies where it's not like a really recognizable face.
Yeah.
Like he's a perfect example of like I can't watch his comedies because I'm just like, oh, this is just Vince Vaughn.
Yeah. I
But-
feel you there. So,
Yeah.
I mean, for me, it's like, it's Vince Vaughn. Yay. Like,
Yeah.
Yeah. Yeah. But he's actually, just one final thing. He's actually starring in a comedy with Ryan Reynolds that's coming out in September, an R-rated comedy, non-existing IP. I was shocked. I could not believe a movie like that got made in this climate, but
Yeah.
I'm really pumped. I like if that movie does really well, that could be one of the dominoes.
Yeah. Yeah. Oh. Do you know what it's called?
Animal Friends.
Animal Friends. Okay.
Yeah, it's got the two of them star in it. Elizabeth Banks is in it. David Spade, like all of like the OGs.
Yeah.
Yeah,
Who's directing?
I don't know, not off the top of my head. It's done though. Like it's in
Oh, yeah,
post production.
I'll have to check it out.
Yeah,
Yeah.
for sure. But yeah, no, this was a really great discussion. I really appreciate you coming on, Terrell. This was a fun one and a super optimistic one. We need that.
Yeah. People doom and gloom, but you can't let small-minded people control big dreams, you know? Like you got to just stick to it, keep at it, make movies, put them out there, find your audience. You'll never find your audience if you don't make movies.
Right on. Mic drop.